Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch, and you can call me Nike. This is actually a topic I don't think I've covered basically at all on my channel before. I've mentioned it here and there on stream or on the podcast. Magnolias Magic, by the way, if you're not following it, you should be. But I want to talk today about the dichotomy of the divine masculine and divine feminine. I want to talk about other substitutes or different ways to understand it. That's my son. Hello, sir. So I want to talk about different ways to understand dichotomies, dualities, and different ways that you can view it and understand the general concept of different dualities that exist in magic. So to start, we see a lot of the divine masculine, divine feminine duality, often in fertility-based religions. We see it a lot with Wicca, and it was very, very prominent for a long time because Wicca was sort of the largest pocket of readily available witchcraft information. Obviously, this has changed over time, so there is I don't know that I would call it a movement, but a discussion about moving away from those terms to use other things. Now, I want to start off by saying there's nothing wrong with the two terms, divine masculine, divine feminine. There's nothing wrong with using those terms for energies and describing the way that things are magically. It's just that for some people it feels insufficient or like there is too much baggage with those words culturally, the way that we use them normally. So a lot of people, like myself, try to move away from them because for me personally, I don't use masculine and feminine for most things, like for general energy work, unless it's specifically talking about masculinity and femininity as we understand it within cultural contexts of gender and gender presentation and expression. Now in ceremonial magic, I know that my friend Georgina talks about this. You can find her channel right here. She will talk sometimes about the divine masculine, divine feminine, and the middle pillar of the divine androgyne. It's not always necessarily going to be an either-or thing. Sometimes it's more of a spectrum. Sometimes it is more of a three-part system, like with the divine masculine, feminine, and androgyne. There's lots of different ways to understand it. So the understanding of divine masculine, divine feminine is going to change depending on the community. Generally, divine masculine and divine feminine are understood as more, they're understood more with masculine being projective, being active, being something that is much more energetic, something more forward. I might call it diurnal for my astrology people out there. And feminine is often a bit more receptive, more subtle and gentle, something that moves a little bit more in the shadows, nocturnal for my astrology folks out there. And it's not necessarily about being feminine or being masculine, about being male or female. It's just about the ways that energies work. So often what we get sort of bogged down on is that connotation with gender roles and societal, cultural connotations behind the words. If you're looking for different uses, there's also a conversation to be had about the fact that it's not just these two things. It's almost like saying fire versus water when you also still have earth and air. So you have these different polarities that exist with each other without it necessarily being the only polarity there is. So if you have masculine and feminine, well, you also have other aspects that work either together but are not necessarily the same, like fire and air, or you have things that are opposite that are not necessarily opposite of that specific thing. So while air and earth may be opposite, earth is not necessarily opposite fire, even though fire is masculine and earth is feminine, depending on the system that you're using. So there's different dualities that exist out there, different polarities. I know astrologically we see this a lot with the planets. We have the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, being opposite Saturn. So that is a duality, a polarity right there. We have brightness, bright and light, lighting up the sky versus dark, cold, far away Saturn. We have the same thing with Mercury and Jupiter. Now, Mercury and Jupiter being opposite does not mean that Mercury is up at the sun or Saturn. They just work and have a different relationship with those things. So Mercury being more of the student, being fast-paced, being the messenger, whereas Jupiter is often kingship, rulership, large and expansive. There's also things that work together and separate. So within astrology, we also have Venus and Mars sometimes being put against each other. They both rule the signs opposite each other. So we have a Venus sign opposite a Mars sign in both cases. We have Aries and Libra, and we have Scorpio and Taurus. Venus and Mars being opposite each other. But they are both nocturnal planets. They are planets that work well in the nocturnal sect. And so they have similarities and differences that make them work together and separate, with and against each other, depending on the circumstance. So it's not always that these energies must be one or the other, A and B only. It's not a binary system. It is just the ways that different kinds of energies work with each other. Now, if you're looking for some solutions for replacing masculine and feminine in your vocabulary when it comes to energy, I have a couple of suggestions that I like for myself personally. I am starting to move a little bit more towards diurnal and nocturnal because of my astrological studies. I was talking to my friend Capt about this. So that is one, of course, diurnal and nocturnal, or daytime and nighttime, for those who don't necessarily know those terms. One of my other favorites is passive and active, or projective and receptive. So you have projective, which is projecting outwards, being more of a forward energy, something a little bit more straightforward, something more in your face, versus receptive, that which receives. This also plays into that diurnal, nocturnal sun and moon sort of thing. The sun projecting its light, the moon receiving the sun's light. And it's not that they necessarily must be opposite, but they have that relationship with each other. And they work in different spheres. There's also active and passive, somewhat of the same, but has a slightly different vibe to it. So instead of projective being projecting outwards, it's more active being actually moving in motion, starting things, getting things moving, with passive being things happening to it or sitting and receiving. It could be offense versus defense, could be another way of looking at that sort of relationship. And there's lots out there. There's always going to be different dualities out there to be looking at. Dark and light is something that a lot of people have sort of moved away from because of certain connotations that go with it, but there is some of that. We just use it a lot less in the community these days, at least online. And there's lots of other options out there. I mean, I'm sure if you look in the comments, there will be people talking about their own different uses of words that act as a duality or a polarity in their practice. And again, it's not necessarily that if somebody uses two words for a duality aspect, there's not other options, because there are. I will always go back to the elemental thing. Fire and water being opposite, earth and air being opposite, but there's still more than just a set pair. There's more than that, and there always will be. I think it's also important to note that with these polarities and dualities, there are also going to be cases of things that exist either on the in-between, things that go back and forth, or things that exist entirely outside of these polarities, not within a different polarity itself, but just as a different entity altogether, a different energy altogether, which is sort of playing back into that divine masculine, feminine, and androgyne thing, that androgyne being either the coming together of the two polarities to be this one middle pillar, or to be something completely separate from those, more of a triangle versus a straight line across, with the androgyne being in the middle, that middle pillar. We see this a lot with Mercury in astrology, something that is not diurnal or nocturnal, but can be either one depending on the circumstances, not really masculine or feminine, and again, can be either one depending on the circumstances, not benefic or malefic. Mercury as a planet and as an energy is this in-between, shifting either or and also neither at the same time sort of energy. And so if you're looking for something that exists outside of polarities, you can look to examples like Mercury. You can look at Dionysus or Odin or Hermes as gods of things that exist sort of in between, back and forth, shifting in and out, and also completely outside of those things. Loki is a great example for Norse pagans as well. He has a lot of shifting characteristics. He has mythology of changing not just shape, but also gender. There's different ways to refer to him depending on the myth. I mean, there's lots of shifting ways that the gods interact with these dualities and polarities. Odin stepping outside of gender roles to go from the more masculine magic into the feminine magic taught by Freya. There's lots of examples of stepping outside of these things, so don't feel like you have to limit yourself to a strict polarity or a strict duality. There's always going to be different options for you to use, and I would encourage you to explore. If you want to try different terminology and see how that might affect your relationship with magic and with your understanding of magic, I would encourage you to explore. And again, if you like using masculine and feminine, that's great. If it works for you, it works for you. It has worked for a lot of people for a long time, and I think that's really wonderful. But I think it's also good to explore other options. So I've been using passive and active, projective and receptive. I've been playing around with diurnal and nocturnal lately, and I definitely have been connecting with more of that mercurial back and forth, all and nothing, both and neither at the same time kind of energy. It's very exciting to play with. So I would definitely encourage you guys to explore some of that. All right, I think that's all I got for you guys this week. So I have links, I have socials, they're down here. If you're not following me on here, you should do it. I'm very cool, and it's free, and you can always unsubscribe later, so there's no harm in doing it. And you can get alerts for all of my content. You can turn on the bell, I guess. That's a thing that YouTubers say, right? Follow me places, I've got social media, and that's it. So I'll see you guys next time, and blessed be.